Welcome to episode 154 of the Half Point Per Podcast. I'm your host, Evan Riggs, joined as always by my co-host, Dalton Willie. No Johnny Pham again this week. We will hope that Johnny is able to return next week. Apologies to anybody who's been following the chaos on our social media in the last couple hours. Dalton didn't have power. Then we found out it was going to be 1:30 a.m. till he had power, and then it came on shortly after. So it's been a little bit of a roller coaster, but we're here. We're ready to talk buy lows and sell highs today, Dalton. How are you doing now that you no longer living like a caveman? Power's back on. All is well in the Willie household.
Will say I think the big NFL media is trying to prevent us from getting these sell highs and buy lows out because I think I saw somebody walking around with one of those NFL Rob Lowe hats yesterday, and I think they tripped a few breakers. So we wouldn't have anything ready for this for our listeners to be able to get some good lineups out there before Thursday Night Football comes out.
Who plays Thursday Night Football? I don't even feel like I know.
Giants Cowboys in a battle of the NFC East of who can suck the most.
God, we have a great Sunday night game this week. Checks out that the Thursday night game is trash. Real quick, before we get into it, you know, I failed the people last week. We saw each other right before the pod, so I forgot that we talked about the swimming lessons in person and not on the pod. But Dalton, I know you've got a great swim lesson update for the people this week.
I do. We are progressing, first of all. Let me just say, lap, down and back, able to do it. Swim instructor tried some new things out this week. Those things included dunking me underwater while I was trying to swim to teach me not to be fearful of the water, which all that is a great learning lesson for how you should handle your buy lows and sell highs. Sometimes you have to be fearful of what you're going to do, knowing it's going to pay off. And even if you drown a little bit, the reward's worth it in the end.
That wasn't quite as animated as the version I heard last night, which was accusations of waterboarding being thrown around.
We've had time to unwind from the immediate impact. It's not often that a 30-year-old man get shoved underwater by a 20-year-old woman who I have trusted my life with.
On that note, let's get into it, Dalton. As I said, buy low, sell high. Pretty self-explanatory with that. But I thought real quick before we jumped into that, it would be useful to go back in time to this time last year, week 3, heading into week 4. Where were we through 3 weeks of last season? Well, there was some real and there was some very, very, very fake. What turned out to be pretty real, not quite, but pretty real that I would have told you was fake at this time last year was Raheem Mostert. At this time last year was the number 1 player in fantasy football, not just among running backs, ahead of every quarterback through 3 weeks as well. Tony Pollard was the RB4. We all remember the year that Tony Pollard had last year. It was not that. Kyron Williams, the RB5 out of nowhere. That one did turn out to be very real. Kenneth Walker, RB3, not entirely fake, but he was more like an RB2 type of player instead of the overall RB3. Miles Sanders, Alexander Madison, and Roschon Johnson, who found himself in the news today, were all ranked ahead of David Montgomery, who was the RB26, and Jahmyr Gibbs, RB28. And I believe week 3 was peak Jahmyr Gibbs workload freakout last season, if I remember correctly.
It was.
Kirk Cousins was the QB1. Obviously, that was cut short by injury, but I don't think that would have lasted. Tua was the quarterback 3. That, of course, fell off a little bit down the stretch last season. Josh Allen was the QB8 last year through 3 weeks. That just seems impossible for Josh Allen to be the QB8 through any amount of time right now. The receivers are the most jarring to me. Do you have any memory of Marvin Mims from the Denver Broncos being wide receiver 12 through 3 weeks? And it wasn't just one big game. He had 2 pretty good games and then 1 quiet game. So he had back-to-back, like, startable games to start his career and just has not done anything since.
Yeah, well, I think in there was the Miami blowout game where he got some reps in the end of it that probably inflated it. But as somebody who was a Marvin Mims truther and I'll just say Sean Payton hater, I believe that the breakout is still there somewhere.
Tutu Atwell was the wide receiver 11, and Tutu had a nice year last year, but obviously that did not quite sustain. Debo Samuel, wide receiver 6, that was pretty much pretty close to on par. And then Mike Evans, wide receiver 5, drastically outperformed his price, and that did end up being a real thing the whole season. And then tight end, you've got 1 that turned out being real, 2 that were very fake. Sam Laporta, tight end 2. We probably were like, let's see what this rookie does as we go on. Hunter Henry, tight end 3, classic veteran, just catching a couple touchdowns here or there to start the season, which I think he did 2 weeks ago as well. And then Donald Parham Jr., who is no longer on the same team he was last year, was 5.
Yeah, and I mean, right now Hunter Henry is tied in 9. So
there we go.
Remember, these things are subject to change. And if you look at rankings right now, there's a lot of high-scoring players. And remember, it's only 3 weeks in. So 1-0 on that score sheet can end up really changing that player's narrative for the next couple of weeks, which is where you, as a smart fantasy owner, need to jump in and make some assertive trades. For instance, if I told you 6 weeks ago, Evan, you're one of the biggest J.K. Dobbins truthers. If I told you J.K. Dobbins was RB12, what would you say?
I would say I knew it was coming all along, Dalton. No, I would say, I don't know what I would say, actually. I guess I would say, okay, I guess he's just finally healthy, and let's let's see what happens. We will talk about J.K. Dobbins a little bit later.
We both will then.
We'll see how that conversation goes. Another guy that kind of fits that mold of just like a low score can tank the week, take the year through 3 weeks. Amon-Ra St. Brown did nothing. Week 1 has 2 very good games back to back. He's like a low end wide receiver 1. He is being asked about by Joseph Park. I will ask Joseph, do you mean for Kenneth Walker, Zach Charbonnet, and Zach Wilson, or one of those 3? Because if you're trading Kenneth Walker or Amon-Ra St. Brown for one of Kenneth Walker, Zach Charbonnet, and Garrett Wilson, no matter which one it is. If it's all 3 or even 2 of those 3, if it's Kenneth Walker and Garrett Wilson, yes. If it's Garrett Wilson, Zach Charbonnet,
he said yes, all 3. I would trade for all 3.
Yeah, all 3. Then yeah, I think you got to do it.
Yeah, I'd pull that trigger.
He lost Pacheco, and so James Conner is his only running back. All right, Dalton. Let's jump in to the buy lows and the sell highs. And do you want to start negative, positive? Do you want to go back and forth? How do you want to handle this order here?
I like to eat my veggies first, so I think we start with our sell highs.
Okay. I'll let you lead the way with the sell highs. The buys, I think, are more interesting. You're going to be surprised at a couple on my list.
Oh, my first sell high, and this one should come as no surprise to anybody who has listened to this podcast in the past. But it is time for you to capitalize on Rachaad White and sell him while you can.
He is on my sell high, and it is not really a sell high. It is exactly what you said. It is a sell while you still can, because potentially there might not be that chance in 2 weeks to sell him for anything.
Yeah, and let me say, I think he's always going to have flex appeal because he is a very talented pass catcher. Mm-hmm. The problem is he has not been an effective runner. He wasn't last year. He was 3rd in the NFL in expected rush yards under expectation. And this year he's done the same. A pretty jarring stat is he's being hit behind the line of scrimmage at -1 yards per attempt, but somehow Bucky Irving is getting hit 3 yards in front of the line of scrimmage. He has a positive rush yards there. And most of the reason for that is Rachaad White's not getting to his holes in time.
Yeah, it just tells me he's not seeing it and not making quick decisions.
Yeah, he's just not been decisive. And we are in kind of that range where there's a ramp-up period for rookies in the NFL, and Bucky Irving is still in his ramp-up period. But right now, what Rachaad White has is he's still getting the high-value touches, which is what you need to sell him as, which he's getting all the passing down work. And so far, he has all the work inside the 10. So those are 2 major positives. I don't know how long both of those continue. I can see the passing down work, but Bucky Irving's been too effective on the field. He's second in the NFL in rush yards above expectation, and he may not have the passing chops, but there's so much room for him to take down the Russian role in this offense that's been really effective up until last week.
Yeah, and I honestly, I'm not even sure the passing down stuff is because Bucky Irving does not have the chops as a receiver, but he is just so tiny, and Rashad White is a pretty big guy. I think he's probably a much better pass protector, and they feel more comfortable with him out there in those situations. I've got a couple of fun stats just to throw your way here. Some of them obvious, some of them are just box score. Rashad White, his last 2 weeks, 10 carries for 18 yards, 6 carries for 17 yards. Bucky Irving on Sunday, 9 carries for 70 yards. Little fun fact. Rashad White has 432 carries in the NFL, and Bucky Irving already has as many runs of 30 or more yards as Rashad White has in his entire career. And, you said it. You're selling him on those high-value touches. He's still getting the passing down. He's still getting the red zone stuff for right now. And I say for right now because, Bucky Irving is second in yards per carry. Rashad White dead last at 2.1. I think Bucky Irving is like 6.1, which that won't sustain. But you can sell Rashad White on what he did last year, that name value, and the hope that he'll bounce back. And, you just look back at last week. I think Bucky Irving was like 32% of the snaps or something like that. But if you dig a little deeper, which you're hoping the people you're selling them to are not doing, Bucky Irving had 56% of the rush attempts last week. And Todd Bowles, who, if you follow the Coach Speak Index on Twitter, has been a pretty reliable guy as far as telling you about injuries, about workload, about whatever. He pretty much came out and said, yeah, we got to get him more involved. So I think we're only going to see Rashad White's share as a rusher shrink and shrink as we go on, because Bucky Irving has just already proven to be a better player in that regard than Rashad White.
Yeah, and I have a little fun name game here for you. So there are 2 running backs in the NFL right now who have a missed tackle rate above 25%, an explosive rush rate above 15%, and a yards per route run over 1. It's Bucky Irving, and who do you think the other one is on that list?
Until you said the yards per route run, I was going to hit you with J.K. Dobbins, but I think the fact that the Chargers have thrown for like 15 yards to running backs this year probably takes them out of that equation. Say the 3 stats again. It was yards per route run over 1, and then the other 2.
Missed tackles force rate above 25% and an explosive rush rate above 15%.
And this isn't a guy that has only played 1 game, is it?
No, he's played all 3 games.
Okay, because Kenneth Walker was going to be my...
He surprisingly hasn't found the end zone, if that helps you. Or maybe he's found it once. I could be wrong.
Well, okay. I won't think about that one too hard then. But is it David Montgomery?
Oh, you're so close. It's his backfield mate.
It's Jahmyr Gibbs. Jahmyr Gibbs has found the end zone.
Okay. But yeah, so to give you an idea, like Rashad or Bucky Irving right now is in pretty elite territory. I expect those numbers to come down a bit when he gets more carries, obviously. But it's hard for a coaching staff to not have a player with that potential on the field, especially when you look at his career. Rashad White's explosive run rate, the best he's seen in a 3-game sample size, which we'll be doing with Bucky Irving here, is 9%. So he's never come close to that. And explosives matter for teams like this, especially a team like the Buccaneers, who want to move that ball down the field. So I think it's time to capitalize on that and get him out of your lineup and get somebody in who isn't going to be losing work as the season goes on and somebody who could see more work.
And, just to prove that I think you can still sell him, I saw the footballers tweet out a video, a panic thing about Rashad White. And one of them, I think it was Jason, because they were like, are we going to push the panic button on him? And he's like, not quite all the, close, but I don't want to tell people to bench him yet, even though Bucky Irving looks better, basically. So people are still holding out hope, and I'm just not. And that obviously for both of us is shaded by what we have thought of this player this entire time. All right, Dalton, that was both of our first sell high. Who was your second one? I feel like we may have the same second one too, because mine is pretty obvious.
I don't think we will, because this one,
Okay.
I argued with myself if this even qualified as a sell high, considering the season this player has had. But give me a second to explain my logic here, because I think it's important to it. And just know, like, this wasn't an easy one to come to the conclusion on.
Okay.
But I'm putting down Mark Andrews. So let me first
I need to hear the explanation for this.
let me first say, Mark Andrews after week 1 would have been a buy low for me. I would have been all over that. Second, let's talk about why he's here, because he's like the tight end 40 right now. So it's not like he's doing great. The tight end position is so bad. One player in half point PPR is averaging over 10 points. The average from tight end 2 to tight end 24 in points per game difference is 1. This is a generationally bad start to the season for the tight end position across the board.
And by the way, that whole thing is a Travis Kelce tweet, because like you look at some of these plays that have been left on the field, 40-yard reception that was called back by a penalty. There was the play, where Rashee Rice catches the out route, but Kelce had completely toasted Jesse Bates for what would have been a long gain. I think Mahomes was a little bit sped up. Footwork was out of sorts, blah, blah, blah. Long story short, if Kelce just makes like 2 more catches, don't even include like a touchdown that he could have had. He could be like the tight end 5 and nobody would care right now.
He could be the tight end 1 pretty easily. Dallas Goedert's only there because of one giant game where both his receivers were out. But to expand on that a little more, there's probably not a fantasy player right now who's comfortable with their tight end position. And with all of that parity at the position, I still think name value is incredibly important. Unfortunately, a lot of people are going to get lost in the fact that it's a bad year for tight end, that they're going to be looking for name value, which is where Mark Andrews, I think, still has that potential to be somebody you sell. The underlying metrics are absolutely horrible for Mark Andrews. He ran 33% snaps last week against the Dallas Cowboys.
Yeah, he's just like not been on the field.
He's not right. He's coming back from a tightrope surgery, which has affected some other players. And Tony Pollard, for one, it took him until week 11. I think you spin that as positive. That second half of the season, Mark Andrews will be back. The Ravens team, despite what my co-host may tell you, is still very much in need of a second pass catching option, because Rashad Bateman, there's something going on there. I don't know who the problem is at this point.
His Trinity score is higher than Zay Flowers, just barely, which if you don't know what Trinity score is, it's basically deployment and usage and all of these things. Just look it up on Twitter.
He's out there and he's open a lot. He's just not getting the ball.
He scored a touchdown on Sunday, sir.
I'm not going to further expand on any of that. But there's still, especially with the way, like, Sam Laporta has started off bad. Obviously, he got injured. Trey McBride has been off to a non-stellar start. Dalton Kincaid until a touchdown yesterday.
McBride also injured right now.
Yes. Was on a very not happy start. Evan Ingram's out with a hamstring injury. George Kittle's out with a hamstring injury. There's so much problems at the tight end position that I'm going to take the player that people think they can count on, and I'm going to sell him. Even though I'm selling him for like Bucky Irving, who people probably picked up off waivers, I'm doing it because I think this is going to be a roster anchor in the worst sense, where every week he's on your roster, you're starting him because it's Mark Andrews. And every week you do that, he's not going to return value. So I'm taking it before things get worse and there are 8 zeros in the column or 8 2-point games in the column, and people really look at that and scrutinize it, that you cut your losses now and you just treat them as a sunk cost investment.
Yeah, I think this is where you and I differ. Just being in leagues with you long enough, I know that you have less of a problem with cutting your losses. And even if you're out too early, you don't care. Whereas like me, I will hold on, and sometimes it works out, and sometimes it is exactly what you said. Whereas like I am more likely to want to hold on and just pray he has a good game in the next couple of weeks, and then I kind of reconsider. Okay, should I sell? How do he look? Like make a decision there. So I understand it. It's just really hard to know what to do. However, if I am selling him, I am looking at a guy who I did not put as a buy low, but I think is a buy low right now, and that's David Njoku. I'm finding the David Njoku owner and saying, hey, like, I'll give you Andrews for Njoku, and then another like bench type, like a fringe starter bench piece type of wide receiver,
or a Downs or something.
Yeah, because like we are going to get Jameis Winston at some point, unless the owner is the reason why it hasn't happened already, because Deshaun Watson is passing. I think their pass rate over expectation is like the most or second
It's the
most.
highest in the league.
And he is still having arguably the worst season in the NFL at the quarterback position right now.
Yeah. To give our listeners an idea, I'm a day trader and Evan is a Vanguard 401k. Don't look at it until you're 60. That's kind of how our philosophies are different when it comes to fantasy football. I'm moving as much as I can. Evan's like, we'll see. We have a long season ahead of us. And I'm like, screw you. I'm taking Tutu Atwell for AJ Brown today.
I don't think that's probably the example you wanted to use to prove the value of that point. But okay, I'll go out of order here. I'll give my big one. I'm going with his teammate in Derrick Henry as a sell high right now, and it's not because I don't think Derrick Henry is going to be good this year, and I'm not saying like sell him at all costs by any means. But you mentioned Jahmyr Gibbs earlier. Do you think I could trade Derrick Henry for Jahmyr Gibbs straight up right now? I mean, Gibbs has had a fine start. No one's mad at him for his start, but it's been like 12 to 15 points every week. He hasn't had the big blow up week, whereas Henry just scored 30. He just had multiple big plays, big touchdowns. Like that type of trade him straight up for a running back, a younger running back who I like better is kind of what I'm looking at.
So I mean, I think you could just based on Jahmyr Gibbs right now is 14th in scoring. Derrick Henry's 4th, and there's about a 4-point differential in their scoring.
Yeah, like he just had 30 points against Dallas. He's the RB4, 16 and 10 the previous 2 weeks. So you've been fine with Henry so far this year for sure. But he had more rush yards in week 3 than the previous 2 weeks combined. He already has 4 touchdowns, which I mean the touchdown thing could continue, but it's just 4 touchdowns in 3 games is a lot. That's obviously probably going to slow down. The concerning things right now are he has 2 receptions on the season. He plays virtually no third downs. He plays no 2-minute drill. And he's faced the third most stack boxes or third highest rate of stack boxes in the NFL. I think it's behind Jordan Mason, and I am forgetting who the other person was. But that is partially, I think, and we talked about this a little bit after week 1, the Ravens are just a little bit predictable in when they're going to run and when they're going to pass. Now, they did finally hit some big runs under center the other day. His 2 biggest runs of the game, I think it was 29 and 25 or something like that, were both under center. But unless they're going to really evolve that offense and do more play action, more stuff out of under center, I just have concerns for the types of looks that Henry is going to face throughout the season. And again, he's not getting the passing down work. Even the 2-minute work that ends up in the red zone, it has still been Justice Hill on all of those snaps. Like you think back to the Chiefs game, Henry was on the sideline for like an entire quarter, basically, to end that game. So again, he's an awesome player still. I think he's going to be a top 12 running back, but I think you could probably sell him for guys that I think are more like top 4, 5, 6 running backs or that similar type of receiver the rest of the way. And I'm just looking to do that because just like the workload, 52% of the team snaps, and he has 41% of their rush attempts. That's good, but it's just not, I don't think that is not going to sustain an RB 4, 5, 6 type of season unless he has 18 touchdowns.
Yeah, I'm sticking with Henry on this one because I think 18 touchdowns is possible. He's at 4 right now.
It's possible. But I still cannot predict it at this point.
Yes. But no, I think that there's definitely usage players that you can take over him who are currently valued under him because they haven't gotten the end zone as much. Like I would be comfortable with Jahmyr Gibbs. I would be comfortable with Jonathan Taylor.
Oh, yeah.
Bijan Robinson is a full 12 spots under him. I would be comfortable with Bijan. Like the usages there are much better. If you're doing the trade though, you just have to be well aware that there are going to be weeks where you regret it, where Derrick Henry does do the Derrick Henry thing and has 3 touchdowns. But also, coming up on the Ravens schedule, they do get the Bills this Sunday. And if the Bills come out there and embarrass them and Derrick Henry doesn't play in the second half like he did against the Chiefs, then you're going to be a little upset having Derrick Henry. Then they get the Bengals. I'm not even going to guess what's going to happen in that game with Bengals. I'm just going to
The Bengals have a pretty poor rush defense. That is what I will say about that.
But Bengals, and I don't know, by the time they play, it'll be October. It's a different month for them, and suddenly
Hey,
they turn it around.
the Bengals are the team to beat in the AFC, Dalton. And by team to beat, I mean they're literally the team that everybody beats in the
everybody
AFC.
beats them.
Oh, that's unfortunate. Nate just joined on Instagram right when I said that. I'm sorry, Nate.
Oh, so sorry, Nate. Looks like we do have a question in the chat from Antonio Lopez. If you want to pull that up.
Yeah. Antonio is asking, would we trade Waddle for Mason or Waddle and Mason for Jacobs and Pickens PPR? I mean, we talked a little bit about the Waddle stuff last week with Tua, and I don't really know what the Dolphins are doing at quarterback these next couple of weeks. That still kind of seems up in the air.
Might be Tyler Huntley.
Jordan Mason, man, I don't know. Christian McCaffrey went to Germany to see a specialist about his Achilles early, like not just recently, earlier on, but we just found out about it, is what it sounds like. But when you go to Germany, that usually means something's not quite right, and you're trying to figure it out. So
the United States in that 1944, and something was not right.
Well, okay, I am concerned there. I mean, Pickens has been really, really good. The route running.
Oh, sorry,
Pickens.
You're right there. Not in fantasy.
Yeah, not in fantasy, the route running. So I think he's kind of like a sneaky buy low if the route running stuff continues. Josh Jacobs, he's about ready to get Jordan Love back, I think. So I think he's going to be back. Better days ahead for him. I think I'm taking the Josh Jacobs and Pickens side of this deal.
So this one's a really hard trade, like all the way around, for a variety of reasons. I would say I'm going to disagree with Evan. This isn't going to be helpful for you. I would do Waddle and Mason because I do not know when CMC is back, and everything is good for George Pickens underneath. The problem is this Steelers team is completely content to give Najee Harris 26 touches a game and win the game 10-3. And George Pickens can be irrelevant for most of those plays. He's become a very much improved player. I will not lie about that. And then with Waddle, I think it gets better if Tyler Huntley is there. I don't know how much better, but I think it gets better. And then with Josh Jacobs,
Tua will be back at some point, it
allegedly.
Seems. Yeah.
And then Josh Jacobs is getting all the work, but he hasn't put it up on the scoreboard. I think he's like RB 30 right now, or like 24. He's had like 3 straight 11, 10, 11 games or something in that range.
Yeah, but I mean, their offense just has not been what their real offense will be going forward with Malik Willis. It's been good, but like the Jordan Love's not keeping read options for touchdowns. It's just been different.
So I do think he's a sneaky buy low. He actually had 5 points last week, which is surprising considering how they played that game. But I would stick with Waddle and Mason because I think there's a non-zero chance Mason plays like 14 of the games for the Niners at this point. Yeah,
the thing is, like, what happens if CMC is back in week 9? Then you feel pretty bad about having just Waddle and a good handcuff to show for it, and Jacobs and Pickens are potentially there and both balling out, because like Pickens has had so many plays called back this year. He really could and should have a better fantasy stat sheet than he does right now. And like I said, he is a guy who the reception perception for the first time in his career is pretty glowing through a couple weeks. Now it's a small sample size. We will see.
Yeah. And I won't expand on this comment because I don't have the information for it. But what if Jacobs just washed and he actually has bad underlying metrics? I don't know. I do, just for clarity, because I know how my history on this podcast with Josh Jacobs is.
I mean, I have not watched the Packers games the last 2 weeks any closer than what has been on Red Zone, but I did watch that whole Eagles game because it was a standalone game, and I thought he looked like Josh Jacobs in that game. So I would have to see a much larger sample of concerning stuff. I would say if you're like I'm still on Jacobs and Pickens side of this. If you are in a bad way, desperate for a win right now, it sounds counterintuitive because we're worried about Waddle, but I think Jordan Mason is pretty clearly the best fantasy asset today, right now, for the next month or so. So it kind of depends on where your team is at right now, too.
Yeah, definitely.
We will continue with the sells. Dalton, I think we both have one left, right?
Yep, down to one.
All right, you go ahead.
Surprised nobody. Last one here is Chuba Hubbard.
Okay, he's mine. So with that too, I thought was going to be the same.
Oh, okay. So part of this is it looks like Jonathan Brooks is going to be back in the next 3 weeks.
Yeah.
I actually wrote this before the Canales report came out. That sounds like he's pretty much done with his ramp up from the post ACL surgery. That's part of my concern. They're going to mix in. They've mixed in Miles Sanders already, who I still don't think has looked great. I've actually watched all the Panthers games on all 22 because I've heavily invested in that franchise for all the wrong reasons. Hubbard's looked pretty good, but this offensive line has looked really great. Like they've been the third best pass block unit and the sixth best run block unit, according to Brandon Thorne. And so I want to invest in players behind it. What I will say is I think Hubbard is out exceeding expectations after last week with this new look offense under Andy Dalton. Who would have thought we'd be saying that in the year of the Lord 2024? But
Chuba Hubbard has been marked safe from Bryce Young after week 2.
But two things. One, I don't expect this offense to do that every week. Like no. I even with Andy Dalton, I really don't think they're doing that every week. And two, I think one of the players that will most likely lose value quickly when they're not doing that every week, which might start next week, is going to be Hubbard. And then with people getting closer to Brooks' schedule and Brooks starting to see field time, and I'm assuming by week 8, Brooks has one big play where Twitter's finally like, this guy's arrived, and then you have no value. You just want to get off it before that hits your inbox, and he's worth nothing.
Yeah, and it's gonna feel bad because you knew that when you drafted Chuba, it was a short-term potential starter, long-term pretty good handcuff, and like that's fine. But the reason why he's a sell high, I mean, he just had 26 touches for 170 yards, basically. I think actually it may have been 169 yards, which is a nice game. RB5 last week, I believe. You said it. Brooks is eligible to return in week 5. We'll see if he does, or week 6, whatever it is. It does sound like he probably will be back soon. Miles Sanders has been getting work in the passing game, like you mentioned. I do think that'll be like Miles Sanders will go away, and Jonathan Brooks will take the passing game stuff, and Chuba will still get some work on the ground. And you might be surprised, 60% success rate on runs this year for Chuba Hubbard, which is like, wow, he's actually been really good running the ball this year. So I do think he is still going to be involved and get the ball. He's not going to be a complete zero. Not a guy you probably will start for fantasy unless this offense really, does some things we don't expect with Andy Dalton down the stretch here. But I would still just try to squeeze as much value as you can out of it. And I think that is trading him. And yes, Jonathan Brooks is coming back. Everyone knows that. But he just had the great game. The offense is looking like it is on the uptick from the first few weeks, obviously. And again, sorry, Nate, if you're still in here, but they play the Bengals this week, and the Bengals have not had a good rush defense this year at all. So that is a potentially good matchup for a desperate fantasy owner who you could just squeeze a little bit of long-term value out of them in a deal.
Well, and to Evan's offseason point, there's still a ton of even the sharp fantasy community that are saying Carolina's going to take it really slow with Jonathan Brooks. And so there's an outcome that's possible where this is still a 60-40, 70-30 split in favor of Hubbard. And in your selling, that's something that can be really profitable for you. But I would sell him for guys like Ramondre Stevenson's coming off of a dud week, and probably everybody's really concerned about that.
0.3 points.
Yes. Some would say it lost a matchup against their co-host. I don't know who that would be. But there's like Joe Mixon will be back eventually. That owner could be in need of a start. Even Najee Harris, who has not had great games, but he's had the workload. He screams into the void, but it will get there. And then like some of those second tier guys, and then another.
Well, and even like you probably can't trade for this guy right now, but like a guy in the same value tier as Devin Singletary, I would trade Chuba for that and feel okay.
We'll talk about
Devin. Okay. All right. So we're done with the sell highs now, right? We're on to the buy lows. All right.
Time
we
for
had
fun ones.
Yeah, we had 2 overlaps there. I thought you mentioned J.K. Dobbins earlier. Is he a buy low for you? Because he's a buy low for me.
Well.
Yeah.
Look at us. There's no way I'm putting him as a sell high.
So he's a buy low for you?
Absolutely.
So it feels weird to say that he's a buy low. Like you said, he's the RB13. If you just told me before the season, Evan, J.K. Dobbins is the RB13, and you're going to have him on the buy low show before week 4, I'd say, okay, man, sure, like, whatever. But here's the thing. He just came off of a game where he goes 15 for 44. Joe Alt is now banged up, going to miss time. Justin Herbert, banged up. Seems like he might just keep playing through it. That is not really great for anybody involved, but that seems
And
like that may
Rashawn
be.
Slater.
Yep, Rashawn Slater also banged up. But most importantly, I say most importantly, first this, and then most importantly, the Chiefs, who they play this weekend, have allowed something like 50 carries for 125 yards to running backs this year. They have played, Zach Moss, not a world beater, but fine, very solid. Derrick Henry, who is the RB4, and Bijan Robinson, who they just held to, I think it was like 16 carries for 30 yards on the ground or something ridiculous like that. So J.K. Dobbins probably is going to have a bad game this week. I say probably, knock on wood, Chiefs fans, probably.
But let's hope it's a bad fantasy game and not a bad J.K. Dobbins game where you no longer see him.
Yeah, we don't want that. But so you can buy him low on the premise of teams banged up, got a terrible matchup. You don't want to start him this week, and just kind of go from there. But you look a little deeper. Gus Edwards had 3 carries for 9 yards last week. J.K. Dobbins played a season high 65% of the snaps last week. J.K. Dobbins also had an 83% running back rush share in the game, and that was in the mid-40s the previous 2 weeks. And he just, eye test wise, I know he doesn't have the long speed completely back. He was never like the fastest long speed guy, but he still looks a little awkward when he breaks away. But other than that, he looks like J.K. Dobbins to me as far as the vision, the cutting, the making guys miss, and it's a great running scheme that he's in with Greg Roman and Harbaugh. So I am all the way in on the buy low here for J.K. Dobbins.
Yeah, and I'll give you a couple of more reasons as to why he's going to be a really good buy low coming up. So one, to Evan's point, the Chiefs are going to be an incredibly rough matchup for him, especially considering the offensive injuries to the Chargers. 2, he's coming off his worst game in the points category, but his best game utilization-wise. And 3, they have a bye after this week. So the J.K. Dobbins owner is probably going to have 2 weeks of bad performances and then a week of a bye. Coming out of that bye is when I expect a major ramp up. So right now, his utilization score based on fantasy data is 7.1, which makes him like in the RB 14 to 16 range in utilization, which is pretty good. But his rush share has gone up every game. Gus Edwards fell to the worst of the season at 15%. 95% sure Gus is just cooked. Like he's just not been good. And he's not the Gus bus 5 yards a carry, and 5 yards a carry is what you get.
He wasn't. He wasn't that last year in Baltimore either.
I wouldn't be surprised if they call up Kamani Vidal to take that Gus spot. But if they call up the rookie, I would be more expecting an 80% share for J.K. Dobbins. J.K. Dobbins has all but 10% of the running back routes ran in this offense, which is an incredibly high rate. They don't throw to a lot, but it's there, and the utilization will be there. And the Chargers aren't going to.
Yeah, and that's a small sample size where it's like, okay, you could realistically see him actually have decent pass catching volume based on the role if it turns out the first few weeks of actual utilization is just kind of fluky.
Yeah, and I don't think this Chargers team is going to be able to keep games close with some of the games they have coming up, especially against Kansas City, where we could see.
We'll see. We'll see about that. Well, we'll keep every game close.
Kansas City's doing a good job keeping it close. So it's going to be a rough couple of weeks coming up, but that just makes that buy low window higher. When the Chargers, when their schedule opens up, it gets easier. I think there's going to be a lot of value in having J.K. Dobbins.
Yeah, and so people might ask, okay, why am I buying him low right now if I can just wait 2 weeks and buy him after 2 more bad weeks? Well, number one, because like you said, the good weeks are on the horizon at that point if you're trying to buy him. And number 2, yes, the matchups are bad, but that doesn't mean they're going to go bad. He could still have good games in either of these next 2. Like, he could have a very inefficient game against the Chiefs or whoever, but he still scores 2 touchdowns. And like the fantasy day is great, and you can't buy him. And now the matchups are coming, and they're great, and the window is gone. So I still think that this is the time to strike, even if the struggles could happen over the next few weeks, because we obviously we cannot predict what will actually happen in those games. We can just lay it out on paper in trade scenarios and hope we get hook, line, and sinker there.
Well, the last thing I'll say is coming out of the bye, the Chargers' next 3 games are against run defenses currently ranked 22nd or worse. So they play the Broncos, who have the 22nd run defense, the Cardinals, who are 26th, and the Saints, who are 30th in run defense. So, like, those are the games that you want to have them for, and you don't want Twitter going off about it after the bye that J.K. Dobbins coming out of the bye is still healthy. This offense has their players back, and now they're playing a bad rush defense on a run-heavy scheme with a run-heavy coach. Like, you don't want that narrative out there when you're trying to buy it.
Yeah. The only thing is every time I buy into J.K. Dobbins, not only do I get hurt again, but he gets hurt again. So please, my guy, please just stay healthy, because I think there are some good fantasy days ahead for J.K. Dobbins. All right, Dalton.
We got a question in the chat from Nino we want to bring up real quick.
Sure. So Nino says, I'm in a pretty tough spot with this trade. Got offered Tyreek for Chris Godwin. He's 1-2, but Tyreek has 2 tough matchups and then a bye. So I don't know if I'll be able to rebound. I know Godwin's been great. I think he has a touchdown every game. He may have had a game with 2. But I think if you're selling Tyreek for a guy that you feel better about now, you still have to aim higher than Chris Godwin, in my opinion. So I still think I'm taking the Tyreek side of this.
I'm also taking the Tyreek side of this. What I would say is I would ask for Godwin plus, and that plus would be, we're going to talk about it in a minute, but like a Devin Singletary, a Bucky Irving, a Jonathan Brooks, like players who have value going forward and may not have it right now. Like George Pickens would be a really great addition to this one. I think that one might be a little tough depending on how your Pickens owner views them. Even, I know we just said he's a sell high, but like even adding they're on the same team, but Rachaad White here would be kind of interesting.
I'm just not interested, but
I know you're not. But I would still be asking for more, because Tyreek, as tough as his matchups are going to be,
the matchups do not matter for Tyreek.
Yes.
All that matters is, can his quarterback get him the ball? And like you said, if it's Tyler Huntley, maybe. And like, guess what? They're going to do everything in their power to scheme up Tyreek Hill touches.
And I want to remind everybody, last year, when Joe Burrow was gone for the season, there were a lot of people saying Jamar Chase was so high, and he proceeded to put up like a 6-week span where he was a top 12 wide receiver every week, because that's what studs do. Justin Jefferson did the same thing last year with guys who didn't even know the playbook.
Well, he's doing it right now. I don't think Sam Darnold is all of a sudden some amazing quarterback. He's got a great coach, and he's got a great receiver, and those two things are very helpful. Yep, exactly. Okay, 2 more buy lows for us, Dalton, then we'll get out of here. I will let you go first.
This one, I didn't realize how bad of a season this player was having until I actually looked. But Brandon Ayuk, he's outside the top 30 wide receivers right now. It's last week, Jawan Jennings stole his valor and had one of the like craziest seasons or like single game outings of a player in the history.
Yeah, it was like 41 points or something and half-point scoring.
I think only Jerry Rice has had more fantasy points on the Niners than that. But it was a tough week for him. So let me first say this window, I think, extends to next week. So they play New England this week. And Christian Gonzalez, when he has shadowed somebody all season, he has shut those players down. When those players get moved around, they might get some points. But I think it's another tough week for Brandon Ayuk.
And that includes Jamar Chase in week 1. He was on him a lot. Yes. So he has and like he was on Garrett Wilson a lot against the Jets. So he has shadowed and succeeded against some of the best.
Yes. But it's still there. So looking at the fantasy data scores, he is first in route win rate and third in separation score. He's still an amazingly good wide receiver. If you watch and if you've seen the games, there's a little bit of rust here. And the rust is there because he didn't practice all off season. Yeah. It's going to get better as the season goes on. And he was the guy who performed above expectations when this lineup was fully healthy with CMC, Kittle, and Debo, which we don't have right now. The big games are coming for him, and I still think he's a top 12 talent in the NFL in a scheme that is very friendly to his position right now. And Brock Purdy has looked incredibly good in spite of all of these injuries. In spite of the loss to the Rams, he was excellent. So go out there, get that disgruntled Ayuk owner, and I mean, I would go pretty high again. Like this Tyreek Hill trade you mentioned, Tyreek for Ayuk would be a lot closer for me.
Yeah.
And you could probably get a bigger plus in this one because Ayuk's been so poor of a fantasy player so far.
Yeah, no, I agree with everything. Not really anything to add there. So I'll move to my next buy low. And this is a buy low in the sense of, yeah, this guy, Breece Hall, is the RB6 this year. So it's not like you're buying him at, not even the Bijan price of an RB2, and certainly not like the Josh Jacobs price of the RB30 or whatever you said he was. But I think people are a little fed up with the Braylon Allen experience. So I think if you want Breece Hall, I'm not saying he's easy to go get by any stretch, but I do think you can pay a fair price and go get the RB6, who I still think can be the RB1, RB2, RB3, at least, down the stretch this season. Breece Hall has gained 160 of his 170 rushing yards after initial contact this year. And Braylon Allen's looked good. He's been very impressive, but also the seas have parted for him a little bit more than they have for Breece. And Breece also still has a 20% target share. He has the same number of PPR wide receiver points as Mike Evans, which is just that is shocking. And people are fed up with him. He has done nothing but have 15 plus point weeks. He's the RB6. And people are like, well, Braylon Allen is the number one PFF running back right now in the NFL. I'm like I said, he has been impressive. Eye test is pretty good, but I still think Breece Hall is one of the 2 or 3 best running backs in the NFL. And even if he's not getting 90% of the usage, he's still getting 20 touches a week. He's still getting a ton of targets. He is still a great receiver. He made a one-handed catch in the backfield the other day. He had a high point touchdown catch in the end zone either week 1 or week 2. I can't remember, where I think it was Matt Waldman was like, Traylon Burks could learn a thing or two from the way Breece Hall went up and high pointed this ball in the end zone against this defender. This guy is just looked very good the other day. Will it always look that good? No, probably not. But if we get pretty good Aaron Rodgers and this offense moving like they were, Breece is going to have some 35-point games this year, and he is going to be a top 3 running back. And I just think, and it was weird, man. Twitter was just, you would think Breece Hall was like the RB20 right now with the way people kind of talk about him and talk about Braylon Allen and how it's a problem.
Yeah, and it's hard to justify the way Twitter was reacting when Breece Hall is the RB6 and has done basically up to expectations against some teams that have had pretty good defenses. I mean, the Titans defense is good. The Patriots defense has been good. And then the Niners defense is incredibly good. So I'm all in on buying the Breece Hall experience, especially Kyron is outscoring him right now. I would straight up 1-for-1 Kyron.
Oh, yeah.
Breece.
In a heartbeat.
James Cook as well. That one seems anomalous to be RB5. And even somebody who's a Derrick Henry truther, I'm taking Breece every time.
Yeah.
It's a 1-for-1 trade. So yeah, definitely would look to acquire him if his owner is getting cold feet with the Braylon Allen experience. 2 running backs can exist. And the second thing to remember here is the reason Braylon Allen is being utilized so highly is because Allen Lazard is the wide receiver 2 on this team. And Mike Williams was playing with the 2s in that blowout. So a little bit of concern that Mike Williams fully washed and Allen Lazard will be their 3rd or 4th pass catching option behind Breece and Braylon and Garrett Wilson.
I saw someone list Allen Lazard as a sell high. Yeah, guys, no duh. But who is buying Allen Lazard?
Yeah, I'll trade you Allen Lazard for Jordan Whittington. What are we doing here?
Yes, let's go. All right. Your last buy low here, Dalton.
This one already got got spoiled because Evan said his name, but it's Devin Singletary. I did not expect this. I didn't expect any Giants running back to be good.
No.
Devin Singletary has not just been good, but he's been kind of great.
Well, and their offense has been pretty solid. I just have to interrupt and say I saw a tweet the other day from a Giants fan who's like, "I'm afraid that Malik Neighbors is so good that Daniel Jones might actually keep his job."
And that's true because Malik Neighbors is carrying him. He has like a 38% target share right now. It's insane. But with Devin Singletary, he leads all running backs in forced tackles per carry, which I did not expect. Devin Singletary is only the RB19, so it's not like he's lighting up the scoreboard. And I don't think he's ever going to be top 12 in this, but he is consistently a top RB2 start week in, week out. Giants offensive line has not been bad run blocking. They're 15th according to Brandon Thorne.
Yeah, and they've been right around average in both regards, I think, this year.
Yeah. And there's not a lot to say except that sometimes the players you want on your roster, you just want some guys who are on the field every play and contribute and continue to do effective runs. And that's what Devin Singletary gives you. He's never going to give you a 30-point week that wins it for you. But right now, guys, I would consider trading up for Devin Singletary, who I think are kind of running a little hot. Zach Moss. Evan and I both like Zach Moss, but what I've seen from Singletary in the Giants offense, I feel a little better about than what I've seen from the Cincinnati offense.
Yeah, and like we're no huge Chase Brown fans, but Chase Brown I think is better than anybody behind Devin Singletary too.
Yeah, Tony Pollard's another player I would trade for him. Najee Harris, who I talked about earlier, has that workload, and then a handful of these top scoring wide receivers I would happily trade for him. If people are doing it, Alec Pierce and Alan Lazard, wide receivers 13 and 14, yeah, I'll trade him for Devin Singletary.
Jawan Jennings?
Jawan Jennings, anybody? Jalen Naylor, anybody?
I said last week on the show, I was like, yeah, you could do worse than Jawan Jennings as an emergency fill-in. Clearly, you could do worse than Jawan Jennings.
Just so everybody here is like understanding of what I went through on Sunday, I thought I could outsmart the weekly fantasy contest crowd, and I knew everybody was in on Jawan Jennings because how cheap he was, and I was like, I'm not going to put him on any of my lineups for DFS.
He was
subscribe and like this video so I'm not homeless at the end of the month for the amount of money I lost on Jawan Jennings not being in my lineups.
But I'm glad you brought up some names because I don't think I said earlier it might be too late to buy Singletary low, but you're saying a buy low for him is like you're valuing him as a RB 20-ish type of guy instead of closer to his pre-draft price. Yeah. So your buy low for him is still around his draft price probably, and you just think he's better than that, which he very well might be. Like I probably got too over my skis with him when he was a young lad in the NFL, but I do still like him as a player. I think he's like a very solid NFL running back. And
well, what's funny?
Obviously, Dabble loves him, So
we get just like major throwback. First year we did this podcast, we went like fight for fight on Devin Singletary versus Zach Moss.
Yeah,
and it turns out we're
both of them are still okay.
Right.
Yeah, they're both still okay.
Right. So kudos to us. No one will remember that but Evan and I, but we were both right in our own right.
We'll keep telling ourselves that. All right, Dalton. Anthony Richardson. Here is one where maybe we both have a chance to be right still if he can turn things around. I mean, he started off great. Week 1, it was like 28 points, and it has not been good the last couple of weeks. On Sunday, he went 10 for 20, 167 yards passing, no touchdowns, and 2 of the worst interceptions I have seen on my television so far this season. He did also get tackled at the 1-yard line on a run. I think he got tackled inside the 5 another time. So you were that close to still a giant fantasy day despite horrendous passing results from him. And, the Colts have a couple issues right now that are leading to them almost never having the ball, which is obviously a problem for fantasy. Number one is of their own doing offensively. They cannot move the ball. They're going 3 and out or, having short drives a lot. And that is obviously a lot on the quarterback, I'm sure. And maybe some other stuff happening in that offense too. The second thing is their run defense. I mentioned the Bengals. The Colts run defense has been, if not the worst, one of the worst in the NFL this year. And teams are just possessing the ball on them and marching up and down the field. And, I'm not one of these like time of possession, got to have it to win games or, like if you're hitting explosive plays, it's fine. But the Colts obviously are not doing that for the most part outside of a magical pass that Richardson threw in week 1. But he's still the QB 14 because he had such a big week 1. And I do still think there's going to be plenty of weeks where the rushing alone gets you there. And most importantly, I do think there are better days ahead passing. I'm not surprised, as I'm sure people listening to this and also who listen to our preseason stuff will not be surprised by me saying this. I'm not surprised to see growing pains for Richardson as a passer. And then when the rushing stuff just doesn't come around like it has in the last 2 weeks, it's going to lead to some down fantasy days. But now, this is why I was against drafting him at cost, because all it's going to take is a couple weeks of this, and you can trade for him for less than he was drafted. And I think that window is now, because, he could have 28 points any given week because he runs the ball effectively and scores 2 touchdowns. So I think it'll be a roller coaster, and I think I would like to trade for him and not have to start him if at all possible, but I'm still in on buying him on the whole, and I think you could still have a lot of upside with this guy rest of season.
It's a big surprise coming from you. Couple things I'll say. I've obviously followed Anthony Richardson very closely considering my pre-draft expectations. A lot of it is on him. So, for instance, Anthony Richardson leads the league in turnover worthy rate. He's also single-handedly holding up the league's yards per attempt rate. He has a crazy 12.1 yards per attempt rate when the league average is 7.6. He still is chucking bombs, and it's probably one of the only quarterbacks in the NFL who can off-platform throw it 60 yards like he did in the Houston game to Alec Pierce. In addition to that, through 3 weeks, the Colts lead the NFL in drop percentage among wide receivers. They're at a high 9.8%. Second highest is 6.8%. So the receivers aren't doing him any favors either. And part of that is because he throws it like a missile every time he gets the opportunity to, even if it's 5 yards. I think that'll come to. And then he has not had the rushing production I think a lot of people expected. He's 7th in the NFL among quarterbacks in rushing points added.
It had to have hurt your soul to see Jonathan Taylor get not 1 but 2 straight carries on the 1 yard line after Richardson got tackled on the 1. I thought for sure one of those was going to be an AR keep.
Well, and sometimes your luck runs cold on that. He obviously has what could probably be considered the most hideous interception this season in the end zone in that game. But at the same time, there are things that this Colts offense isn't doing that they did last year that I think will start to regress. They're the league low number of offensive plays ran. Part of that's what you talked about. Is their defense has been so bad until last week against Chicago that they haven't been able to get their offense to stay on the field because their defense is on the field for so many drives.
That could be a Chicago problem.
Yes, could be. Or DeAndre Swift particularly problem. And they play the Steelers this week, so I don't expect that to change, and I expect that window to extend. But then going into week 5, the Colts play Jacksonville. Jacksonville runs the highest man coverage rate in the NFL. And one thing man coverage isn't going to do a good job at is covering these deep routes the Colts are willing to throw. And the last thing I'll say is Richardson's played 19 games since his start in college. Like, he still is very new to the NFL and to football in general. And he's the youngest quarterback in the NFL 2 straight years in a row. Like, there's going to be growing pains. But yeah.
Having Josh Downs, I know he played last week, but he like just came back, and perhaps he will continue to find his groove and get more involved. And not that he's the best receiver, because that's still Pittman, and Pittman's also banged up. That is not helping. But Josh Downs is projected to be the easy button in this offense, and that could be. I mean, part of why they're throwing deep a lot is because of Anthony Richardson, and maybe part of why as well is because Josh Downs hasn't been there to get open every play on the underneath stuff too. So his presence will surely help. Dalton, I think you have a comment that I think this one's probably meant for you. I'm roped into it as well.
I think that's both of us.
Yeah, but just given the name, I'm thinking this is like one of your viewers here.
Well, just to be completely fair, I will say we did have matching shirts set up, but with the power outage I was dealing with earlier, I think you probably changed shirts because we were expecting to not have power here till 1:30 a.m. We got power
Yeah.
back, and you were getting all comfy and ready to end your night, and I pulled you back into the podcast. So Evan's wearing the wrong shirt for anybody watching and listening, but at the end of the day, it might be a little bit of my fault.
To read it for anybody who's listening to the pod, Paul Blank comments, which one of you wore the wrong shirt today? Is Evan supposed to be wearing stripes or Dalton supposed to wear solid blue? I will say my shirt, a really cool homage Shea Gilgeous-Alexander shirt, much cooler than your generic striped workman shirt. So I'm going with Dalton as the wrong shirt man here.
Yeah, no one cares about the NBA, Evan.
And no one cares about us anymore, Dalton, because that is going to do it for episode 154 of the Half Point Per Podcast. Give us a follow on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at Half Point Per Pod. We got a great swimming lesson soundbite today. Going to keep adding to that. Going to have a funny TikTok probably in the next couple of weeks about that. Subscribe to the YouTube. The link to all of those things in the show notes. As always, we will respond to any trade, lineup question, whatever you've got in the chat if you catch us while we are on the pod and Dalton has electricity. The show is available anywhere you listen to your podcast, Spotify, Apple, all of that good stuff. Thank you all so much for listening today, and we will talk to you again next week.